Hi everyone, my name is Diana and I'm a representative of the Norwegian team, and our part of the project is the environmental impact assessment. So we're taking a slightly different turn here, with more numbers. Would like to think of what we're doing as telling a story about the environmental footprints of people and groups. And the story starts with how do we actually quantify the impacts of someone's lifestyle? And that we do when we translate their consumption. And we take into account the environmental intensity of consumption to get an overview of the entire footprint of a person. And we thought a good way of doing that will be to investigate different levels of analysis, to start with the country level, where a lot of policies take place. There's a lot of international and national policy effort to mitigate environmental impacts, and really zoom in all the way to the group and individual level, where we'll be able to really see how individuals differ, how their differences in lifestyles contribute to footprint variation. And we like to see all those levels as connected, because even though our consumption is more or less under our control, it is also this control is limited by what is the social norm that we live in, what is the infrastructure and the economic context, etc. But at the same time, in the country, people don't behave in a homogeneous manner either. So we started off with the country analysis, cross-country analysis, and we basically carried out what is called an environmental input-output analysis. And for that, we used a global database that had information on the economic transactions within the global economy, that had information on trade flows and production recipes across different products and across different countries. And this database is called Exaubase. But in addition to all these economic input-output accounts, we had environmental detail, very high environmental detail. So we could really tell, for example, what are the emissions that are associated with the production of a certain product that then gets exported and end up at a completely different point of the world. And then we had an overview of 43 different countries and 5 rest of the world region, and the product detail was up to 200 products. So since we wanted to get this multi-indicator perspective of impacts, because, and this is what actually we've been advocating with our policy relevance analysis as well, that one shouldn't just pick one indicator, let's say greenhouse gas emissions, and focus their attention to that, because there are actually different environmental impacts that take place, and they're in some way connected. And maybe, and there's certain trade-off as well. Maybe something that benefits us in terms of emissions actually contributes to higher resource use in terms of land and water. So we need to reach a level where we have a good overview of what will be the holistic change in environmental impacts from a certain consumption pattern change. So here are some brief results. This was all published in a paper earlier this year in the Journal of Industrial Ecology. And you could see actually how great variation there is across the world, EU, and national averages. Here there are results from the Netherlands. And these are the 5 indicators that we've investigated here. The first one is carbon, then we have land, this is non-organic materials, organic materials, and water impacts. And you could see that in the Dutch case, for example, consumption leads to much higher environmental impacts on average compared to the world average. So that would be close to 4 times higher compared to the global average. And there's nothing particularly wrong with Dutch people. This is just the trend that we find when we compare more developed and developing countries, that as income grows, consumption grows as well. So there's much higher embodied impact. So here I've listed some of the highlights of our study, and one really big one was that our household consumption is actually really important for our total environmental impact. So households, just by their spending on products, contribute to 65% of the total greenhouse gas emissions that occurred this year. Sorry. And globally, if you really aggregate the total amount, you'd see that households contribute to 22 gigatons CO2 equivalents. And this seems like a big number. There's giga there. But if you really want to translate that into terms that would be easier for us to understand, that would be about 22 billion small family cars a year that we emit every year. So if you take a bigger car, if everyone of us living on the planet today emits one big car of CO2, there will still be less emissions than what we currently emit. So it's really a giant number that we're talking about, and this is just our contribution in 1 year. Another important highlight is that the direct emissions, the direct emissions is what we normally think of as emissions. These are the emissions that we see, the emissions that occur during the use of our products. So that is when you drive your car, for example, that's all the tailpipe emissions, or when you burn fuel to heat your house, for example. And this is because we see it, then we put higher importance to it, and of course we want to reduce it. But those actually comprise about 20% of our total impacts, and the majority is in our products, and we can see it. It's hidden there. So a really efficient way for everyone to reduce their footprint is by starting to consume less. And you could see that on this graph here we show the percentage shows the contribution of that category as a part of the total footprint, and on the y-scale we have y-axis we have the intensity of that category. So you could see that mobility, for example, is very emission intensive per euro of consumption, and it's about more than 10 times more intensive than services. So if you take all your spending on mobility, driving, flying, etc., and instead you redirect it to low-intensive services, there would actually be a huge chunk of emissions that get reduced that way. So we've really worked hard on actually popularizing the article and getting it into media channels that everyone really gets to, and we were quite successful. We found people to be very interested actually in consumption and embodied impacts, and we thought just as maybe as motivation for everyone working on such topics is to really try to get the information out there, because the impacts that are embodied in consumption are really significant, and people should consider the environment every day when they consume, and should keep that in mind. So the first part of our study then was focusing on this kind of cross-country analysis, and we used an environmental input-output for that. Our second focus went on the regions. Well, how can we distinguish between environmental impacts coming from different regions? And we, as we started working on that, we saw that the European Commission has actually has been encouraging regions to allocate spending from general regional policies to really trying to mitigate environmental impacts. But while that has been the case and has been communicated by the Commission over and over again, there's currently no good measure of consumption-based impacts that takes place on the regional level. So if there's any regional variation in the consumption-based footprint, we can't really see it with the type of cross-country analysis that I already presented. So we wanted to really dig a little deeper and to see what the variance is. But the problem with this type of analysis is that we can't really do it in the same way. We can't just take the demand estimates from national accounts and use them. We needed some kind of region level estimation of demand. So we had to couple the use of the environmental input-output database with some kind of surveys that would really say something about what the consumption was of different regions. So we had to use consumer expenditure surveys from 177 regions in EU to really calculate footprints in a bottom-up fashion. And the years of the survey, the surveys were very harmonized. These are the household budget surveys in the European context. And the data that was collected was between 2006 and 2014. The environmental analysis was again based on Excel-based 2.3. So what you can see here is one of the outputs of our analysis. We'll show it here. You're very welcome to try this link in your free time and play with it. So here what we have is the total carbon footprint across EU regions. And you can see that across some countries there is huge variation, like for example the UK, Greece, some parts of Spain, but other countries seem very uniform. You could switch to interval scale actually to really see how the ranges of impacts change. And if you want to zoom in a particular country, let's say Austria, you could do that and really be given a better overview of that particular country. And if you're interested in the impacts by consumption category, you could just select one of the 6 ones that we have here: shelter, food, clothing, mobility, manufactured products and services, or you could also switch to a different environmental indicators. So if you think of the dispersion in terms on per capita level, you'd see that some countries are really associated with much higher dispersion than others. Italy is a really interesting case because the difference actually between the poor and the rich regions in terms of their footprints is about the size of the Romanian average footprint or a Bulgarian. So we're talking about really big differences here. So then we wanted to dig deeper and really have something to say about what kind of determinants are there in play on region level. And we could see that income alone explains 53% of the formation of footprint.
How much?
53% of the variation. And the relationship is not exactly linear. As you can see, it levels off after a certain level of income. So this has to do with changes in consumption patterns. But but we're also looking into, we're currently finalizing this analysis, looking into additional socioeconomic, geographical, and technical variables. So then, as you can see, we already carried out the regional analysis, and the difference with the data that was used was the utilization of those consumer expenditure surveys. But then how do we go even further? How do we look into groups and individuals and calculate footprints based on their lifestyles? And for that, we use the GLAMURS surveys. Did you not refer to that earlier today? And we're really changing the way, or we've utilized a very modern version of carbon footprint, because we don't just consider top-down background calculations. We don't just simply take the regional value and amend it based on your consumption expenditure, but we actually calculated a lot of the stuff bottom up. So, for example, there were a lot of questions that on what kind of food consumption people had, and we coupled that with environmental intensity information to produce the actual footprint. And we also adopted a lot of LCA results and additional input-output studies. So some preliminary results from the surveys. Here we, on this graph, actually compare the initiatives to the regions. The initiatives were those sustainable living people, and the regions is what's considered mainstream. And you could already see that in just food consumption, there is actually quite big differences in some of the regions. Of course, how the initiatives are very different in their in the way they define sustainability and the way they define lifestyle change. So that could explain some of the cases where there is less of a difference between the region and the initiative. But this is a good way for us to really pinpoint the hotspots of people's consumption and to really tell where impacts occur. And another thing that we do in the analysis is that we calculate the behavioral potential for change. In one way of thinking about transition is to really say about what will be the environmental benefit of switching from high intensity category to a low intensity one. For example, from switching to meat to vegetables. But at the same time, we're able to estimate other changes that would stay within the same product and within the same category. For example, switching to an alternative with different production or different distribution embodied in it. So that would be, for example, what will be the effect of us consuming seasonal, local, and organic produce. And we're really, the way we do that is through this MAPI approach. What you can see there, this is the input-output framework that we use. In the red boxes, this shows the production recipe. So if we change the production recipe, if we use less inputs for a certain product, that would lead to a change in their total impacts. We could also change the orange part, and that's the demand. We could shift demand from, saying, consuming meat to consuming vegetables. In the green part, that's the environmental intensity for per unit of production. So if we increase efficiency, if we improve efficiency of a system, that would lead to less emissions, for example, in a certain unit of production. And this type of scenario framework we could utilize to for the upscaling as well, for the upscaling of sustainable lifestyles. So some policy relevant points, I've summarized them here. So really the important part is that consumption-oriented approach is very, very important for policies because it actually shows environmental impacts in their entirety. If we only look into if we only adopt the territorial perspective, for example, in the Netherlands, you only focus on impacts that occur locally, then that might not really change anything in the long run, because production facilities might just vacate the area and get settled somewhere else, or or really a reduction in CO2 might actually mean an increase in other resources. So we should have this type of consumption-based approach. The regional level policy is also very important, because if you adopt environmental taxes in your own region because you'd like to mitigate impacts, that would put products that you produce in a disadvantage compared to products that are produced somewhere else where there is no such environmental tax. And this actually distorts the competitiveness of the region. So this type of consumption approach would actually treat imported and locally produced products the same way, so you won't really have that downfall to it. And of course, the last part of our study is concerned with upscaling, and a big part of that would be done through the MAPI approach that I outlined earlier today. So we'll use the input-output framework to really tell how the system of tomorrow will be different from today. We're basically adopting the penetration rates from GLAMURS surveys. We're adopting some backcasting results and additional sources to really tell how the household consumption patterns would change. For example, the diets, how they would be different, how the production recipe would change if we shift to greener electricity, for example. But of course, there is also some more complex aspects where we have to probably seek help of the economists as well, and really try to foresee the changes that would change the system profoundly. Here's just some results from another project, the carbon cap project, that have calculated the improvement from different interventions. And basically what we do in GLAMURS would also be, we'll be able to produce something similar to that, where we'll be able to evaluate different sustainable switches in a way, and really say what will be the reduction in the total footprint of adopting such lifestyles. But at the same time, we have the overview of the entire consumption, so we'll be able to tell if any rebound effect takes place. So if, for example, driving or flying less is associated with higher impacts in a different category. So this was most for me, and there are some discussion points if you'd like to. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And the discussion points were really about how do you think we should tailor environmental assessment to fit policy needs, and how can we actually encourage this type of consumption-based policies. Thank you.
Is there any quick question, clarifying question for Diana? Yeah, Ines?
Yes. This is that 53% of our footprint is income related, and the rest, what influences our footprint?
Yes, so this conclusion was part of the regional analysis, right? So there's a little overview that we have of behavioral type controls. At the same time, we could already see the impact of, let's say, some geographical differences or technical controls. You could see, for example, that household size, population density is important in terms of socioeconomic variables. The climate is also important for, let's say, the shelter footprint. You'd have less impacts in Southern Europe. And then the technical factors, there were also some that stood out. For example, the electricity mix intensity is a very important one. So your consumption mix, in a way, consumption electricity mix would determine what would be the end impacts of the products that you consume.
But you don't know anything about awareness of people about the environmental impacts. Whether this awareness influences also the footprint.
Can you?
The awareness, because we say that people are aware already of the impacts their lifestyle has on nature. Can you see a link there between awareness and actual footprint?
No, we've only really looked into tertiary education as a potential control and not awareness. Yeah, the problem with this. Yeah, the problem with this type of analysis is that a lot of the variation actually disappears when you aggregate it on high region level. So I think the individual and group assessment will be a good place to look for questions like that.
Okay, thank you. Then we move to the next